Guia de estilo e instruções para síntese de fala. Este é o início da mensagem. Comece com energia total e em tom de comando, capturando a atenção imediatamente. Agora, listen. Maplewood smelled like summer dinner and old grass until the lockdown alarm turned the town into a held breath. Rachel had been folding napkins when the first page came through the PTA group. Active shooter reported at Maplewood Middle. Her hands went cold around the linen. The oven's hum seemed small and distant. Ethan was supposed to be at after-school rehearsal. He was not home. If you want to stay for the whole story, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and give this a like. There's more than one way this night could break, and I'll be back with everything that follows. Now, listen. Rachel's drive to the school was a line of headlights and curbside shadows. The streets reeked faintly of gasoline and fried onions from the diner. A neighbor's radio bled static and a voice repeating, "Lockdown, lockdown." Sirens were distant hiccups, then closer, then curiously slow, like something tired of running. The school loomed familiar and odd, brick softened by orange streetlight, the plaque with the lion mascot catching the glare and spitting it back. Families clustered at a respectful distance, their faces lit by phones. No one moved like they meant to leave. She parked with the engine still on, phone clutched until the knuckles whitened. A volunteer held a clipboard like armor. "We don't know where kids are moved yet," he said, voice thin. "They've got us on shelter in place. The principal's—" he checked his phone, thumb trembling. "We think the lockdown started in the gym." Rachel's mouth tasted of copper. Ethan's laugh, sharp, sudden, rolled in her memory. A small noise he used to make when stealing a cookie, or when he'd find a stray cat. She let it anchor her, and stepped forward. The first tale began in the doorway, the human threat that made the air taste metallic and immediate. They funneled through the double doors in small, obedient clumps. Inside the entryway, fluorescent lights hummed, their buzz like a long-held note. Custodians had propped chairs and taped signs to hide classroom numbers. Teachers guided students into curtained corners, their hands on heads like ritual. The gym doors were bolted, every brass handle wrapped in police tape. Kids huddled in the bleachers with backpacks as shields, eyes wide, a flock of nervous birds. A teacher with mascara smudged whispered that a masked man had been seen near the baseball field, and then, lower, almost ashamed, that someone had heard a voice calling like a child from inside the school. Rachel moved along the perimeter, palms on cool cinder block, listening. The principal's PA crackled once, an attempt at calm that sounded clipped. "For safety, remain where you are. Authorities are on site." The voice tried to be steady and failed into the same thin static that had been following the night. She found the gym by the smell first, sweaty socks and popcorn oil. The kids were quiet, their small bodies folded into dark shapes. Rachel crouched, murmuring Ethan's name. A boy near the door had a toy car stuck in his fist. His mother soothed him like a prayer. The sound underneath everything was odd. A thin, high giggle, as if from a distant hall of mirrors. It threaded through the gym and back, ending on a note of wrongness. The masked man they'd reported was real in the first tale. Human eyes reflected in the sheen of a rain jacket under a street lamp, hands working a latch. He had no swagger, only slow, methodical movements, and a voice like gravel when the door heaved. Out. He was shouted at by humans who knew how to use their lungs.
Someone swung a chair, and the man recoiled as if surprised by their heat. For a second, the school felt salvageable. People together, anger as a weapon. But as they tried to escort children into safety, the man vanished like a vacancy. He left behind something worse than presence, voices that weren't quite his. A child's laugh replicated and hung outside the gym doors. Then more. Copies of children's laughter, layered until it sounded like a room full of children standing behind plaster. Heads turned toward the locker-lined corridor where the lights were flickering. Rachel followed the sound, hand on the wall for balance. The hallway smelled suddenly of crayons and something else, sharp and chemical, like antiseptic on an open cut. Lockers were yawning with open mouths, backpacks slumped like tired animals. She heard a scrape further down, metal against metal, and then a whisper of a name. Ethan. It wasn't his voice. It had the right inflection, a child's upturn at the end, but threaded through with something that scraped. The laughter returned, soft and playful and patient. It promised games. She ran. Shoes slapped the linoleum, the echo a staccato of panic. Teachers tried to block her with hands that trembled. "Ma'am, you can't. My son." She forced the words past. The corridor stretched and narrowed. Light flickered as if someone were blinking the bulbs. At the far end, the mirror by the trophy case was fogged with breath that didn't belong to anyone. When she reached it, she saw not her face, but a tableau. Small silhouettes, dozens of them, jammed against a glass that had no frame. The reflections moved slightly out of sync, like a bad broadcast, and one small figure, no more than a child's, lifted a hand against the inside of the glass. Rachel's throat closed. Her reflection had Ethan's slumped shoulder, the cowlick he had never managed to tame. For a blink, her hand met the glass from the other side. Cold. She grabbed at the frame. The mirror surface was not glass. It yielded like slack skin, just enough to disturb her fingers, and the smell that came from it was of old birthday cake and rot, non-specific and sick-making. She recoiled, nausea rising, and the small, correct voice, Ethan's voice now, impossibly near, said, plain as a school bell, "Come play." The second tale began in mirrors. It was not the masked man she could fight with blunt instruments.
Guia de estilo e instruções para síntese de fala. Você é um narrador, palestrante, com voz potente, forte e autoritária. O tom deve ser firme e inabalável. Contexto de continuidade. A frase anterior era: "I spot in the corner where the shadow pulled." Você está no meio de uma frase-pensamento. Mantenha o ritmo e a força vocal sem quebrar a conexão. Haja como se estivesse transmitindo uma verdade fundamental. Agora, segue o texto. Rachel moved toward him, and the voice breathed her name right in her ear, as if the air itself had learned how to speak. She spun. The corridor had emptied. The boy was gone. The balloon bobbed once and then slumped, as if it had been deflated by something soft and enormous. This was the fourth tale, disappearance as a pressure. Children blinked out of existence as if the world found them inconvenient. It was not always violent. Sometimes it was a polite folding away, a soft extraction by hands that did not bruise but erased. Parents described seeing their children in corners of rooms, and when they ran to call them back,
The child would be looking at the wrong place, smiling with a childish patience as if they'd been waiting for the parents to finish speaking. Rachel refused the patient smile. She refused to be patient. She shouted Ethan's name until the sound tore her throat raw. The hall answered with silence, then with a chorus of child's laughter that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. A teacher grabbed her, fingers cold on her sleeve. "We have to get out," the teacher said, eyes wide. She broke off, unable to finish. Her voice curdled into a breath. The fifth tale settled like fog when a teacher found a crack in the school's maintenance plan, a service tunnel used to move equipment between buildings. It was narrow and smelled of oil, a place children dared each other to explore and where secrets were feasible. A group of kids had been rounded up and put there as a temporary shelter while the first responders searched. They were breathing heavily, speaking in whispers, trying not to let the grown-ups know the truth. The tunnel made sounds like someone breathing on the other side of the wall. Rachel squeezed past a line of parents, down into the tunnel, where the light was a single swinging bulb, and the shadow of the bulb made fingers on the wall. The air was thick and tasted of pennies. In the bulb's halo, she saw Ethan, smaller than she remembered, pressed against a concrete seam like a moth pressed to glass. His eyes were enormous and wet. He looked at her as if he had been waiting his whole life for that look. "Mom," he said. It was both relief and accusation. 2 syllables can be a verdict. She lunged. The tunnel felt too small, as if the walls had been drawn closer by something jealous of air. Behind her, someone called for calm. Phones were raised like talismans. The breathing behind the concrete intensified. Something knocked in the pipes, a dull percussion that matched her heartbeat. Then, from the seam in the wall, the laughter came. Low, satisfied, and layered like a chorus that had found harmony. "Play," it said, not as invitation, but as claim. Rachel grabbed Ethan's hand and felt a small metallic chill, like the inside of a refrigerator. His fingers were sticky with something that smelled like waffles and old pennies. He looked at her with the fierce seriousness of a child trying to remember a lesson. "It wants me," he said. "It keeps saying my name." She pulled him. The rope of the world held on his skin, fragile and real. They ran toward a ladder that led up and into the gym, a slope of human noise and the smell of popcorn again, as if hunger and fear were siblings. As they emerged, the gym lights flashed, bright and blinding, as if the building were clearing its throat. People cried out, voices jagged with relief. For a moment, the town found its stomach and breathed out. The climax condensed into a series of actions that were almost animal: grab, pull, shove. The man in the rain jacket reappeared at the exit like a memory of violence. He moved not toward them but away, retreating into a side corridor, as if the heat of human bodies had chased away his will. A cop took the man's jacket and found nothing there but lint and a child's scrap of paper folded into a triangle with a crude smile drawn in ink. The paper crumbled into dust when he touched it. Rachel held Ethan on the grass outside the school, moonlight like a thin coin on both their faces. He was shaking, small breaths like someone who had run a long way and not wanted to stop. She wrapped her arms around him until he breathed against her neck, and the smell of pancakes and glue and something sour that indicated how close he'd been to the thing that had come for him. They slept in the ambulance blanket because someone handed it to them. because the world had arranged itself into gestures of care. Parents clustered, crying, praying, making lists of those found and those missing. Rachel's knees had given out, and the asphalt had been rough under her palms when she sat and watched the crowd. Around them, officers spoke into radios in short, clipped phrases. A reporter tried to get close and was put back by a leash of uniformed hands. They told stories, first one version, then another. A small boy said that shadows had tried to teach him a song. A teacher swore she saw a reflection that breathed back. Each retelling added a stitch of terror. Rachel pressed her forehead to Ethan's hair and kept it still, as if, by doing so, she could pin down the night and prevent it from flitting like a moth toward other houses. For a long time she did not speak. Then, in a voice thin and precise as glass, she asked Ethan what he remembered. He named things with the solemnness children use when they have been confronted with reality. "The mirror wanted to play," he said. "It said it was lonely. It showed me Mommy and Daddy, but they were far away." His hands fiddled with a piece of confetti he had in his palm, a remnant of some celebration now stained and curling. The paper crumbled into dust when he touched it. Rachel held Ethan on the grass outside the school, moonlight like a thin coin on both their faces. He was shaking, small breaths like someone who had run a long way and not wanted to stop. She wrapped her arms around him until he breathed against her neck, and the smell of pancakes and glue and something sour that indicated how close he'd been to the thing that had come for him. They slept in the ambulance blanket because someone handed it to them, because the world had arranged itself into gestures of care. Parents clustered, crying, praying, making lists of those found and those missing. Rachel's knees had given out, and the asphalt had been rough under her palms when she sat and watched the crowd. Around them, officers spoke into radios in short, clipped phrases. A reporter tried to get close and was put back by a leash of uniformed hands. They told stories, first one version, then another. A small boy said that shadows had tried to teach him a song. A teacher swore she saw a reflection that breathed back. Each retelling added a stitch of terror. Rachel pressed her forehead to Ethan's hair and kept it still, as if, by doing so, she could pin down the night and prevent it from flitting like a moth toward other houses. For a long time she did not speak. Then, in a voice thin and precise as glass, she asked Ethan what he remembered. He named things with the solemnness children use when they have been confronted with reality. "The mirror wanted to play," he said. "It said it was lonely. It showed me Mommy and Daddy, but they were far away." His hands fiddled with a piece of confetti he had in his palm, a remnant of some celebration now stained and curling. "It wanted me to come into the glass, but I didn't want to." "You did right," Rachel said. Her voice cracked but steadied, like someone testing a rope. "You did right." The wind moved through the parking lot, stirring the pages of a forgotten workbook. The melody of the night changed pitch. For an instant, Rachel felt a calm so complete it was dangerous, a thin promise of safety. They were safe. They had escaped. Then, as they rose to go, the laughter came again. Soft at first, like plastic rubbing against plastic. It was not the raw, greedy noise of the thing in the pipes, but a whisper close to the skin. "You escaped this time," it said, not from a mouth, but from the air itself, threading between people, settling in the seams of jacket collars and the folds of blankets. Ethan flinched against her. She held him harder. "Not anymore," she murmured, "because words are often the only weapon you have when you have nothing else." But the sentence felt inadequate. They left the gym under a line of lights and good intentions. Neighbors offered casseroles and spare clothes. News vans left their engines idling like beasts with their throats cut. In the months that followed, the town healed with a habit. More locks, more drills, more whispered check-ins. They replaced the mirror by the trophy case with a bulletin board. Children still avoided the merry-go-round sometimes, as if the memory of movement could be contagious. At home, Rachel checked the locks 3 times and lay awake listening to the house breathe. Ethan slept like a small boat tethered to the dock. She dreamed of glass that was warm and smiled like a child, and woke with her palms sweating and the curtains trembling in the breeze. For days afterwards, when she drove past the school, the windows winked like eyes. She could not unlearn the sound of laughter layered wrong. That night, as she stood by Ethan's bed and smoothed his blanket, the household settled into a fragile ritual of reassurance. She tucked his hair behind his ear and let the familiar scent of shampoo and toothpaste be an anchor. He hummed a crooked tune and rolled over, eyes heavy. The house felt solid and full of ordinary things. The kettle, a shoe by the door, a finger paint on the fridge. And then a single folded paper fell from between the pages of a book on his shelf like a dead leaf, landing on the foot of his bed. Rachel froze. The paper was small and old, edges browned as if kept in pockets for years. On it was a child's smile, drawn with a careful hand. Ethan opened one eye and smiled sleepily. "It wanted me to tell you," he murmured, as if he had traded something with a dream. "It said, 'Don't come back.'" Her stomach turned. The laugh in her head was a low thread now, patient and waiting. She picked up the paper. It did not crumble. The smile on it looked sadder than she expected. Someone had said earlier that the shadows needed attention to grow. Rachel understood now. The thing fed on being looked at, on memory, on the small flickers of child laughter that never melted away entirely.
In the quiet that followed, she made an inventory of her home, the way some people check their windows. Light where a shadow could not gather, a toy on the floor where a hand might reach, a nightlight where the mirror hung. She taped a photograph of Ethan to the inside of his closet door. She drew a circle of salt, an old silly superstition, and laughed at herself when it felt childish. But the laugh shrank against the bigger fear, the knowledge that whatever had come that night had not been contained by policy or by bullets. It had made a home in small things, mirrors, laughter, tunnels, and it could fit into any small seam. Outside, somewhere in the town, a merry-go-round turned in a yard because a kid had forgotten to stop it. The metallic clack of its arms on bearings sounded at intervals like a clock counting down. The memory of the night would not leave Rachel alone. She found herself replaying the choices she'd made. Run down the corridor or stop to open a locker. Call the principal or pry the door. Each possibility nested into the next and made a forest of what-ifs. She learned to watch for patterns. Thrice-fold laughter that became echo.
reflections that lagged a beat behind reality, the smell of birthday cake mixed with something old and unpleasant. She learned the small rules. Light pushed back the edges, but only as long as it was kept bright. Names said aloud could anchor a child, but only if the name was not offered as bait. Those rules were not comforting. They were instructions. Time stitched months into the town's fabric. Maplewood resumed its routines. Rachel drove Ethan to school every morning, watched him cross the playground, lingered longer than she should at the fence. He returned each day, some small victory intact. He learned to stop at thresholds, to look back when called, and to resist offers to explore hidden things. He grew thicker-skinned in ways Rachel both admired and feared. The last image that night, the one that sat like a pebble in her shoe, was a whisper that came not from a pipe or a mirror, but from a folded scrap of paper now kept in a shoebox under her bed. Once in a while she would take it out and hold it between two fingers. The child's smile on it had faded further, as if contentment had sept the ink. Sometimes in the dark she thought she could hear the laugh again, far away and patient. She pressed the scrap back into the shoebox and closed the lid, and for a second the house was only house. Floorboards, kettle, the steady river of her breath. Ethan shifted in sleep. Rachel closed her eyes and, a whisper, almost tender, barely audible over the thrum of the furnace. "You escaped this time," it said. Her hands tightened. Her hands tightened until the knuckles blanched. The whisper was not the house's anatomy, not the creak of a joist or the furnace exhaling its tired breath, but a voice that had learned to fold itself into small things and slide through them. Rachel stood very still, listening to the ordinary sounds take back their places, the kettle's faint tick as it cooled, the slow, steady inhale and exhale from the boy in the next room. The whisper did not repeat. It had said what it wanted to say and retreated, like an animal that had been named and decided to go back to its hole. She did not sleep much that night. She sat on the edge of Ethan's bed for hours, fingers finding the fabric of the pillow and the soft ridge of his ear, saying his name like a litany and checking the rules she'd learned. Light, names said aloud, thresholds kept. She kept the lamp burning until the prickle behind her eyes made it almost painful. Ethan shifted and mumbled. Once he sat bolt upright and looked around the ceiling as if a joke had been told above him. Rachel soothed him and stayed, and when the first light of morning made the curtains anemic, she bundled the shoebox into her bag and drove without thinking of anything but getting away from the house long enough to think. Daylight made the town an ordinary thing. Maplewood streets had the small, stubborn patience of places where everyone knew someone else's dog, and all the houses had the same complacent paint. Rachel found a bench in the park and sat with the shoebox on her knees, feeling its weight. She lifted the lid with a trembling thumb. Inside were other folded papers, an assortment of small drawings and torn scraps, some with the curled edges of being carried in pockets, some darkened in places as if damp had kissed them. A child's face stared up from one. Another was a clumsy family portrait, the figures holding hands beneath a sun with teeth. On the bottom, wrapped in a ribbon that had lost its color to time, was a scrap no larger than a postage stamp. The smile on it was precise and tight. Rachel unfolded it. There was a single sentence written in a child's uneven hand. "Don't look under the floorboards." Her throat closed. Ethan had no memory of writing that. She glanced at him then, the boy at the playground, and found him making the same crooked smile he wore in his sleep, unaware of the world of folded warnings tucked into shoeboxes. The park felt suddenly thin, like a page with words removed. She thought of the merry-go-round she'd heard that night, its metallic clack in some far yard, like a distant clock. The carousel had been a child's joke once, the center of giggles and sticky hands. Now its arms are a metronome marking the town's shudder. She could have gone to the police. She had rehearsed the conversation in the last few months, the words that had failed her in other people's mouths. "Something is wrong," she would say, and the officer would offer a number, or a tranquilizing nod, or an attempt to translate the impossible into something that fit a report. Instead, she walked to the community center that housed the playground and found the man who swept its siding every morning. Tom was older than she remembered, the skin of his face a crude map of sun and habit. He frowned when she showed him the paper. "I've seen a lot of odd things round here," he said, and his voice had the slow, careful cadence of someone not willing to say things aloud until he had measured their danger. "But lately, the carousel, miss? It turns on its own sometimes. I come in and the thing's still moving, like kids just hopped off. And I'll find paper, little folded things, all stuck in the gears. Thought kids were leaving notes, reminders or dares. But no, these are different." He dug into the pocket of his jacket and produced a scrap, its edges too smooth, as if it had been handled more than a child could manage. The smile on it was the same careful crescent. Rachel's stomach twisted. "Did you ever see it, kids?" she asked, though a part of her knew the answer. Tom's eyes drifted. "Not in years. Not like that. There was a fair here a long time ago. Word was a small part of it didn't come back when the lights went out. People don't talk much. My aunt, she said laughter stuck like gum. You rub it and it won't come off." The park smelled of cut grass and dryer lint from the picnic tables. In the distance, a dog barked and the bell of the school let out. Rachel felt the shoebox heavy in her bag, like a heart with too much to hold. She thanked Tom and left with the scrap in her pocket, the paper's smile pressing against her thigh like a living thing. That afternoon, she went through Ethan's school bag, the process mechanical and intimate. The homework folder, the half-eaten granola bar, the crayon-streaked library book. In the margins of a worksheet about place value, someone had tucked a scrap the size of a fingernail. It read, "Don't come back." Her fingers shook when she straightened the paper, and she thought of lockers and tunnels and the way a casual glance can become a hook. She spoke to other parents with the slow, searching economy of a woman offering a hand to someone on a dock. Few admitted anything. Most smiled the smile of people who had learned to close their doors. One woman across from the monkey bars, hair in a tired knot, a toddler balanced on her hip, said in a voice that felt like a confession, "My Sarah's been drawing the same faces for weeks, little smiles. I thought it was a phase." She looked at Rachel with an expression that had some hope in it, as if two people catching the same shadow could keep it from spreading. That night, Rachel set up a perimeter, night lights in the hallway, strips of salt in the windowsill, a circle of small glass jars half filled with water around Ethan's door. She read aloud to him longer than she had in months, choosing nonsense stories with no holes in them, words that were solid and round. Ethan followed along, voices slipping into the rhythm of being read to, and for a while they both believed the sound could hold. At midnight, the house settled and settled some more.
Rachel drifted in a chair with a cup of tea gone cold. She thought of the scrap's instruction not to look under the floorboards, and the way the warning was itself an invitation. She imagined a dark seam beneath the house, like a throat. She imagined it full of small folded things, with smiles on them, like teeth waiting to be touched. She imagined the carnival ride, the merry-go-round, doing the same thing the town had taught itself to ignore for decades. The next morning, Rachel went back to Tom. He had taken the carousel apart, or at least what parts of it he could reach without calling for permission. Its core was a rusted star, and tucked into its bearings and between the spokes were an obscene leaf litter of scraps. "They're warm," Tom said when she held one, as if it had been left in the sun, like somebody just breathed on them. Rachel felt the breath in her chest. She reached in and opened a folded thing. It unfolded into a childlike picture of the carousel, the little horses smiling with the same precise crescent mouths. On the drawing, someone had written, in a hand older than childhood, but still hesitant, "We forgot to stop it." "We?" Rachel whispered, though the question was broader than Tom or any person. Tom shrugged. "Old people say the fair was never really over. They say the town forgot what it owed." The phrase sat between them like an accusation. Rachel realized then that whatever the thing was, it had roots in habit and memory. It fed on continuations, the laughter you didn't notice, the machine you didn't turn off, the promise a town made and never kept. It could slip into cracks where forgetting lived. She thought of the scrap in Ethan's shoebox, the child's smile that had said, "Don't come back." She thought of the whisper the night before, tender and patient. She thought of the rules she had learned by instinct, and how brittle rules were when tested by something that could bend them. "If it lives in the paper," she said, "if folding it traps it, maybe the paper tells it where to go." Tom looked at her, surprised. "So, if we break the paper," she finished, the idea rising like a light. They gathered the scraps in a garbage bag, Tom's hands surprisingly steady as he dealt with them. Rachel wanted to burn them, to see the smiles singe away, but the thought of lighting a match near the bearings of something that might be a mouth made her pause. Instead, they carried the bag to the small maintenance room behind the community center and closed the door. For the next hour, they sat and listened. The town went on. Children argued over chalk and pinched knees. Someone across the street turned up a radio. A neighbor watered a geranium like a litany. The carousel was a yard away, its arms slow and having the patience of rust. The garbage bag lay between them, with its cargo of smiles folded like secrets. "How do we know breaking paper will do anything?" Tom asked. The inky foi childish and precise, the crescent mouth so carefully curved it might have been traced with a compass. Under the porch light it looked almost ordinary, like a fragment of a comic or a cutout from a birthday card, and that ordinariness made Rachel's pulse quicken. Ethan sat up in the bed behind her, blinking the sleep from his eyes.
For a moment, his small face was slack with confusion. Then, as though a string had been pulled, his mouth curved into a smile that did not belong to the child who lived in that house. He moved before she could think, feet bare, hair mussed, and went to the doorway. "No," Rachel said, the single word flat as a stone. It landed in the night and seemed to echo. Ethan paused, head cocked, as if listening to something only he could hear. Tom was already at the gate before she had the chance to ask, his footsteps soft on the path. He held a thermos of coffee, even though it was nearly morning, an unnecessary habit he'd picked up in the long, watchful hours after they'd started the work at the center. When he saw the scrap in her hand, he didn't smile. His eyes were small and bright with the same fear she carried. "We burned all of them," he said. "We thought we burned them all," Rachel answered. The scrap crinkled against her palm, as though eager. This one, it shouldn't be here. "How did it get through?" Ethan asked, voice thin and sudden, like an animal's whine. He stepped closer. The porch light carved a pale pool around him. In that light, the drawn smile looked like an invitation threaded with a threat. Rachel crouched until she was eye level with him. "Ethan," she said, and the name felt heavy with everything she had to hold back. He seemed to look at her then, really look, and for a breath there was the boy she knew. The freckles by his nose, the crease in his left elbow from where he always rested his head, the small stubbornness that made him insist on putting on his own shoes backward when he was tired. He reached out unconsciously and touched the scrap in her hand. The air shifted. The porch light dipped, though the bulb stayed whole. The gate made a long, slow creak, as if pushed by something that had learned to walk on hinges. From somewhere down the street, down toward the center, toward the place they'd thought they'd ended it, a sound threaded the air, a tune twisted and wrong, the kind of music that remembers itself badly. "We liked being remembered," the voice said again, softer now, and the words unspooled across the yard like a promise and a threat braided together. Tom set his coffee on the railing. He did not reach for the scrap. He did not move to take Ethan. Instead, he looked at Rachel as if seeking permission to act on her plan or to make a new one. "Maybe it's not just about paper," he said, and the suggestion landed between them like another small object to be handled carefully.
"Maybe it learns where to go." "It learned from us," Rachel said, "from the way we kept folding and smiling, from the things we couldn't finish. We thought tearing would stop it." She closed her hand until the scrap crumpled. The paper did not tear. It folded under her fingers as if it were made of something that did not obey the logic of ordinary things. Ethan's smile widened. "Come play," he echoed, in a voice that had a hair's breadth of the thing in it. Rachel felt anger rise then, a white-hot clean thing that pushed the fear aside. She thought of all the small mercies she kept for herself, the shoebox under the bed, the list of do's and don'ts she had learned as if by instinct, the small rituals that kept chaos at the edges of the day. She thought of the lesson they'd taught themselves in the maintenance room, that paper could be a cage if folded, a place where a thing might live, and of how brittle rules could become when the thing inside them learned to twist. "Tear it," she said.
The command was less to Tom than to herself. She pressed her thumb against the scrap as if to force it to obey. The paper softened, then resisted, as if unwilling to be killed by such ordinary motions. When she finally ripped it, the sound was not the neat little tear of paper, but a long, drawn sigh that scraped at the back of her teeth. The laugh followed, thin and pleased, and then silence snapped, the way a muscle snaps when it's released after being held too long. Ethan made a sound like someone trying to wake from a dream. His fingers loosened. The drawn smile fluttered in Rachel's hand like a trapped insect, then folded into itself and went dead as a thing whose pulse had been cut. For a moment she thought it was over. The porch light steadied. Tom let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. But the silence did not feel clean. It felt like a waiting room. The dark beyond the porch seemed to have weight to it. Shadows that were not merely absence, but patient things, as if something larger had been listening and now sorted through how it wanted to respond. "Did you feel that?" Tom asked. "Yes," Ethan said. He blinked as if waking from a deeper sleep, and then his small face crumpled. "I don't want to be alone," he said. The words pulverized with the kind of helplessness only a child could make entirely honest. Rachel's throat tightened. She folded the torn scrap once more, automatically, as if checking a pattern in a stitch, and then, with a steadier motion, she balled it up and moved toward the house. "Come on," she said, "back to bed." She should have put the shredded paper in the drum behind the center, should have watched the edges curl and blacken until there was nothing but ash. Instead, she carried it to the kitchen and set it on the counter. She could feel the memory of their victories like heat in her pocket. The scraps they'd torn, the carousel's gears without paper, the small hollowed relief in her chest. Yet, the way Ethan's eyes had shined, hungry and trusting, made something harsh and maternal rise up in her. Tom stayed on the step, hands stuffed into his coat. "We can watch," he said. "Keep watch. If it comes back." "It won't come back if we don't invite it," Rachel said. Saying it steadied her. The words were like putting pegs into the boat of her reason. "But maybe we don't know how it learns now. Maybe—" She stopped. There were too many maybes, and maybes were how the thing grew teeth. They stood in the kitchen, the three of them small figures caught by the yellow light. Outside, the town breathed on, the distant sound of someone sweeping or a dog shifting in its sleep, like a promise that ordinary things still belonged to ordinary people. The metal drum at the center would take paper. So would fire. They had done that. They had thought it enough. Rachel folded the torn scrap again, slower this time, not to trap, but to examine. In the corner of the paper there was a faint smudge of color, something like crayon, like a child's attempt at shading. The mark made her stomach turn. A color that had not belonged to any of the town's children. A cadence in the hand that read like a dialect. "Someone else could be making them," Tom whispered. "Someone outside, someone traveling through, leaving them like seeds." "Or someone inside, learning," Rachel said. "Learning how to make us remember." Ethan sat on the kitchen floor and hugged his knees. He looked smaller now, and the smile that returned to his face when Rachel crouched to him was the fragile thing of the living, crooked, full of crumbs, utterly imperfect. He reached for her, and she held him, feeling his pulse against her chest like an anchor. "We can't do this by ourselves," Tom said finally. "If it's spreading, if it's learning, then we need more than 2 hands and a drum." Rachel thought of the maintenance room, of the shoebox under her bed, of the small ledger where she had written down oddities and where she allowed herself to keep names of places where they had found folded paper, names of the children who had laughed wrong at the wrong times. The list read like a map of wrongness, and the pieces they had burned were only markers, not the root. She felt the old fear again, the one that had made her steady during the tearing. Fear of admitting she did not have a rule for every new shape the thing took. If this scrap had arrived despite their work, if it could be drawn in a hand that did not belong to the town, then the rules they had trusted might need to be rewritten. "What if," she said slowly, "what if it isn't just the paper? What if it's the way we remember, how we hold things in our mouths like small coins? We thought if we destroyed the image, we destroyed the hold. But maybe it's the remembering that keeps it alive. Maybe tearing paper matters only when the remembering follows." Tom rubbed his forehead. "Then how do you stop remembering?"
"Not by forgetting," Rachel said. "By changing the way we remember. By stopping the polish. By letting the memories be messy and honest. Paper keeps a perfect smile. It keeps things still. Maybe we have to start letting things move again." Ethan looked up at her as if he understood something bigger than his years. "Can we play?" he asked, timidly. "But not like the thing?" "No," Rachel said, and the answer was immediate and felt both cruel and necessary. "Not like the thing. The way we play is with scratches and wrong notes and dirty hands. We can teach that. We can teach you." Outside, the sky paled toward dawn, and the first gull of morning called somewhere far beyond the town's roofs. The gate, which had been open, swung closed as if by its own accord, and then stilled. The porch light held, steady and indifferent. They had stopped one method of feeding it, but there were new ways for the thing to learn. Rachel could feel the unspent energy of their victory turning into plans, into lists, into the kind of small, stubborn work she was good at. They would search the town. They would go through attics and toy boxes and the back rooms of the center. They would ask questions, the way you pry at a stuck nail. Careful at first, then with leverage, until something came free. "Tomorrow," she said, "we go to the center. We check the boxes we missed. We talk to people who were here last summer, to the ones who were always folding cards. We find where this hand learned to make our faces." Tom nodded. Ethan climbed into her lap and put his head on her shoulder, breathing slow and even. For now he was safe, anchored to the ordinary weight of a mother's arms. But the scrap in the kitchen, small and crushed, had the look of something that had been dismissed but not destroyed. It looked like a question Rosetta could not yet translate. Rachel washed her hands and set the small paper under a jar of rice to dry, an old superstitious trick from her mother to keep things from wilting. She did not know if it would do any good. She did not know if the robe of the world had more holes than she could stitch. But she had a plan, imperfect and stubborn as any human thing. She would not invite the thing to settle. She would make the town remember in ways it had not before.
No more perfect smiles trapped in cut paper. No more invitations left on porches. She would teach them to remember with the mess of living, with mud on shoes, with late apologies, with songs sung off-key. Outside, somewhere closer now, the carousel gave a single, mournful squeal and then fell silent. The sound did not feel like defeat. It felt like a reminder. Rachel tucked Ethan under the blankets and kissed his forehead. Tomorrow, she told him, and perhaps for him it was simply a promise of pancakes. For her, it was a beginning of a different kind of war. The house closed around them, ordinary and fragile.
"Not like that," she said aloud, to the town and to whatever listened, and the sound of her voice had the weight of a vow. They walked toward the center. The carousel, for a moment, made no sound at all.